decided to create this network? Well, for those of you that are new to WBC as a whole, Westminster Business Council is one of London's most effective referral networks. We have a community of about 10,500 businesses, small businesses, large businesses, and our job is to get those companies and individuals connected so that we can support those businesses' growth by introducing you to partners, potential clients, and give you an opportunity to be supported as business owners, because running a company is seriously tough, and we've gone through a couple of really tough years. So what we've created at Westminster Business Council is a community of individuals and businesses that can support each other. So that's what we do as a whole. For a long time, the makeup of the Westminster Business Council membership has been quite heavily skewed towards property and construction. You only have to look outside and see all those cranes out there, all of that new development. It's been very much a big part of our world across Westminster. And it made sense to bring together that group, looking at some of the key issues that are affecting the industry. ESG is a terminology that's being thrown around there at the moment, but what we're trying to do with this launch event is unpick some of that noise, try and provide some support in terms of what ESG actually is and how it is applicable to your businesses. So once a month we will gather, hopefully in places as equally as wonderful as Walsh, and we will tackle different topics together. And the idea is to bring you guys as professionals together to share best practice and share those opportunities to really leave a legacy when we are developing and creating these projects right across London. So that's the purpose of the ESG network. So thank you so much for coming to join us for our launch. And we've got some really exciting events in the calendar. And my friends over at Veolia have just thrown a site visit at their new amazing place. I'm really looking forward to that. So please look out for invitations there. But enough from me. Gavin, would you like to say hello to group and just tell them a little bit more about you and what you do at Sustainology?
Okay. Hello. That's the first bit done. So Sustainology is a firm of a core team of 4 sustainability consultants. We cover all aspects of sustainability: ESG, carbon footprinting, greenwashing. We don't actually do the greenwashing, just for the record. We try to persuade other people not to greenwash. Branding, sustainable marketing, and one of the key things about ESG and sustainability is storytelling, explaining why you're doing this in the first place. A bit about me. Unfortunately, I was originally an accountant. Please don't hold that against me. I have seen the light. That's followed. I eventually saw the light after working in the city for a bit of a time, so I do apologise about that as well. I then started my own business, generally focusing on hospitality, for your benefit. It's an industry I absolutely adore. Then in around about 2016, 2017, I started getting asked to complete sustainability sections on public tenders. I developed quite a good track record. I unbelievably scored 100% on one, which I still haven't quite figured out how I did that. I did tenders for Manchester Metropolitan University, a theatre in Shrewsbury. That's the one I scored 100% in, so it was clearly my acting talents that won that one. As a consequence of that, I've worked with a number of construction companies, and the market now in construction, the tier 1 contractors are moving more rapidly than everyone else and adopting ESG into their practice. But I'm going to bore you to death in the next half an hour. Over to you.
So the format of today is I'm going to throw some questions at Gavin, but we would like to make this as interactive as possible. So if you've got questions, if you've got comments, if you've got personal experience to draw on, please wave at me and I will bring you into the conversation. But let's start with the obvious place to start, not the obvious answer. But what is ESG? What does it stand for? What does it encompass?
It's a great question. I'm still working the answer out. No. ESG stands for environment, social, and governance. It's kind of a catch-all. It's often used interchangeably with sustainability, but they're not quite the same. But that's a story for another day. As explained earlier, environmental issues include carbon footprinting, carbon emissions. For construction, the word biodiversity will send shivers down people's spine because biodiversity is coming into effect. Biodiversity net gain is coming into effect for construction this year. In terms of social, again, that was touched on earlier, the impact you guys have on the community, on your employees, how you manage the sort of various aspects in terms of your diversity and inclusion. Governance will cover how you actually run your company. So that will include things like whistleblower policies, complaints procedures, how you're rewarding employees, gender pay gaps, etc., stuff like that. Okay.
So it's effectively absolutely everything encompassed in 3 letters.
Absolutely, which gives you a clue because I'm not fully an expert on absolutely everything.
Now you tell me.
Yeah, now I tell you. So as a consequence, I mentioned the skills of the 4 core team members in our team. We don't have a D&I expert, a diversity inclusion expert, so we'll outsource that out to a specialist. So that kind of thing.
And why is it that ESG has gained such traction over the last few years? Why is it becoming important for businesses to pay attention to it?
Personally, I think there's 2 answers to that question. Firstly, I'm sure you guys are all aware, climate change is now big news, something to do with the fact that Earth's warming up. For those of you who didn't know, this will be the 10th year in a row where the climate on the planet is over 1 degree higher than the pre-industrial norms. And if you think about that, the target is to try and keep it under 1.5 by the end of the century. At the moment, we're on course for 2.4, which is pretty grim and has lots of effects. The other thing that's happening is the fact that people who are investing in stuff, so the city, are more interested now in companies that have an ESG strategy, because ESG companies tend to perform better than companies without an ESG strategy. So there's a 2-pronged thing there.
And so how are the ways that businesses can actually track how well they are implementing ESG initiatives? Because it's all well and good to do great things, but how do businesses? What are some ways that businesses can actually track whether they're making any benefit to the community, to their employees, within developments that are going up?
Okay. So if we look at the ESG elements of any building that's coming up, so the first and obvious one is the carbon emissions of a new building. The tier 1 contractors will be looking at that specifically, and they'll be forcing it down their supply chain to you guys. And when I say you guys, I mean literally all of you, because the way you calculate your carbon emissions is there's a scope 1, which is the tier 1 contractor. In this example, the tier 1 contractor. Scope 2 is the energy that the tier 1 contractor incurs in doing their work. Tier 3 is any services that they take on board, which is basically all of you guys. So you'll see that people are becoming more and more interested in carbon footprints from interior designers, clubs, and that kind of thing, because it's all part of their work, business travel, etc., etc. So that's one aspect. In terms of the community outreach, that can be measured in terms of one thing I've seen is number of hours volunteered by staff. Certain companies choose specific charities to work with, wildlife trusts in particular, that kind of thing. And governance just is more part of, rather than being a specific project, more part of the whole. So that's what I'd say on that one.
And I guess one of the important things to consider is what are the benefits of really analysing ESG, integrating those processes and practices into the business, because there's doing great things, and then there's potential business benefits. So what are those potential business benefits, and why should everyone in the room be keen to make sure that ESG is at the heart of what they do?
Okay. So I'll talk about industry as a whole, and then construction in particular. So the first benefit is people, normal consumers, are often inclined to buy green products where they possibly can. And there's a premium they're prepared to pay for it. I must caveat that this is before the cost of living crisis, because I suspect most people are now focused on their pennies. But the surveys conducted in 2018, 2019, there was a 15% premium that people were willing to pay for green products, which, if you think about it, is phenomenal in terms of that would be a great turnover boost for a company. Equally, the general population is expecting companies to act more responsibly, with the exception of Shell. But Shell can do whatever they want. So there is a feeling amongst the general population that people should demonstrate their responsibility from a corporate perspective. So by doing stuff and being honest about it and transparent about it, there's a benefit in that regard. On top of that, by using ESG, businesses tend to be better run. They reduce waste as a consequence of the fact that they're now focused on trying to reduce the resources they're using. In addition, that encourages innovation, which I'm sure some of the companies here can explain a little bit more about when we get to the Q&A section. On top of that, one of the huge benefits, and you'll have to excuse me because I have grey hair, so I'm not in Gen Z or any of the younger generations. You have a better retention and recruitment strategy if you can demonstrate that you're a company with purpose and you have an ESG strategy that you are living up to. I stress that if you're just doing it in name only, people will see through it. Unilever is a classic example of this. They introduced their 10-year plan in around about 2010, 2011. As soon as they did that, within 6 months, they were the third most searched company on LinkedIn, and they were ranked third as the companies you want to work for. They were beaten by Apple and Google. So people want to work with companies that are purpose driven. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So what are the key, I guess, first question is, how do business leaders, such as we have in the room, actually sit down and start going through various different ESG policies and practices and implementing from the top, and then taking that right through throughout their staff? What's the best way to approach ESG initiatives when actually rolling that out across the business throughout developments that go up?
That's a long question. Okay, so I'll interpret that question as, where do we start?
Yes, thank you.
So as a consequence of that question, as any of you know, you own your own businesses, you work in companies, whatever. When you're trying to develop a strategy, you've got to figure out where you're starting from. There's no point just driving off into the distance if you don't know where you started. So finding out where you are, calculate your carbon footprint, find out what you're doing in terms of social activities, find out what you're doing in terms of environmental stuff and that kind of stuff. Because what you're going to need is data to go on this journey. Once you've figured out where you're starting from, you're not going to be surprised when I say you've got to figure out where you want to go to. So it's, as you can see, it's beginning to align with standard corporate strategy. So once you've figured out where you're starting from, where you're trying to get to, you then start figuring out objectives on the way. You can start working out how your route is going to materialize. and you're looking at metrics and key objectives. So that sounds very familiar to all of you. Apart from the slight catch, which I come back to earlier, you have to be transparent about what you're trying to do, which if you're going to use an ESG strategy and build it into your corporate strategy, that will often change your vision, mission, and values. Because, if you look at Wilmot Dixon, they have basically declared an emergency for the next decade. And as a consequence, their strategy now is beautiful buildings, stuff about the environment and stuff about their communities. So they've instantly built in ESG into their mission and values. So that is possibly the hardest thing to do. And if you know any good sustainability consultants, they will help you.
Fantastic. And so the key challenges for businesses to actually sit down and start implementing, what are they? Or is it just all of the above, what you just said?
There's some more.
Okay.
So one of the biggest challenges, and for those people in large corporates, I know Brieger here, for one, is you'll have a main board and someone who has this brilliant idea that we should do ESG. Fantastic. The problem is, until the entire board can understand the benefits derived from it, you haven't got total buy-in. If you haven't got total buy-in, then it's possibly going to fail. The second thing I would say is you've got to get your mindset right, in the sense of ESG is a long-term strategy. Subtle hint, it doesn't necessarily generate profits within 6 months. It's a long-term thing. You'll go on a journey, you'll improve over time. Unilever, when Paul Polman introduced that strategy, he said to his investors, we're going for long-term growth. We're not doing short-term profits. Until you get that concept across, then there might be a little bit issue in terms of management. Okay, I'll stop there.